CosmicSkeptic asked some questions for theists, and they sounded sincere, so I thought I would answer them. Just note that I completely accept the theory of evolution. So I will be skipping the questions directed to creationists.
Why would God make the vast majority of the universe completely uninhabitable? And to that extent, why would he bother making the rest of the universe at all if humankind and the Earth are the sole focus of his creation?
I don't think that the earth and mankind are the sole focus of creation. If you read Genesis, you will notice that God said that each thing was good even before man existed. Since the effect is in some way found in its cause, everything that exists in some way resembles God. So everything that exists is in some way good since God is good. This resemblance insofar as they participate in being, since God is being, as I demonstrated in a previous video. As Aquinas said, in the very act of any creature possessing being, it represents the divine being and its goodness. Furthermore, I demonstrated in my video on the argument from motion for the existence of God that God is the first cause. Now, it is impossible for the first cause to be caused by anything outside of himself, else it would not be the first cause absolutely. Therefore, the final cause of God's actions, in other words, the end for which God creates things, can only be himself. In other words, the reason God creates things is to bring creation as a whole closer to imitating God himself. Hence Aquinas says, the entire universe, with all its parts, is ordained towards God as its end, inasmuch as it imitates, as it were, and shows forth the divine goodness to the glory of God. In a nutshell, God created these things because they are good, inasmuch as they have being.
Why would God, after having created the universe, wait 9 billion years to create the Earth? Why would God then wait a further 4 billion years before humans were able to be created?
As I pointed out, I am not a creationist, so my answer for why it took 9 billion years for the Earth to form is the exact same answer you would give. Of course, you could always ask me why God started with the Big Bang, but I could equally ask you why the universe started with the Big Bang. The answer we would both give is that we simply do not know yet. We don't even know if the universe began for sure. It looks like the universe is finite, but we're still in the early stages of trying to figure this out, as far as the science goes. I think CosmicSkeptic may mean something more along the lines of, why would God wait 9 billion years to create the world when the world was the purpose of his creation? The same answer can be given here as above. The purpose of God's creation is to reflect his goodness, not to create the earth or even man. Furthermore, God is timeless, so speaking of God as waiting is technically incorrect.
If God is omniscient, then he knows the future, and he knew from the start that one day he would be wiping out the majority of the human species, save Noah and his family. So why would God not just begin with Noah and his family?
The evidence seems to support the idea that the story of Noah was based on a historical Mesopotamian event in ancient Sumeria, which was turned into poetry. This was commonly done in ancient times because the typical way of transmitting information back then was song. Most people were illiterate, so it was necessary to create a memorable story. We know this story spread throughout multiple cultures all across the Middle East, so the authors of Genesis was probably aware of the story, and it seems that, whether it was one author or two, that they took the story and used it to contrast the differences between their monotheistic God and the gods of polytheism. That said, the more general question would be, why did God allow man to sin? Surely God could have created Noah first rather than Adam. The Catechism of the Catholic Church has an answer. But why did God not prevent the first man from sinning? St. Leo the Great responds, Christ's inexpressible grace gave us blessings better than those the demon's envy had taken away. And St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, there is nothing to prevent human nature being raised up to something greater even after sin. God permits evil in order to draw forth some greater good. Thus St. Paul says, wherein sin increased, grace abounded all the more. And the Exutet sings, O happy fault, which gained for us so great a Redeemer.
Why has God only ever appeared to such a small, selective group of people? And why hasn't he appeared again since, especially given the dwindling of faith across the globe that we're currently experiencing?
God is immaterial. The only way to demonstrate that God exists is through his effects. God's existence is demonstrated through the argument from motion. Now, maybe God could force people to understand the argument, but why would God do that? So that they might be saved? We know this is not God's intention at all, though, because of what Jesus said. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. It is clear that God does not want to make things perfectly clear. The reason is because God wants people to seek him. As Jesus said, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. Why would God give someone something they do not deserve? Let me tell you something. If you are obstinate and close your eyes and ears to the truth, then you will have no right to think that anyone should have to break through those barriers and force you to learn. Believe it or not, you have some obligation to educate yourself, and it is not anyone else's responsibility to convince you that God exists. It is your responsibility to learn what is true.
Why would God prioritize his own ego in his commandments, detailing precisely how he should be worshipped above the commandments not to murder or steal?
It has nothing to do with God's ego. God doesn't gain anything from our actions. The reason we worship God is because our supreme happiness is found in what the Catholic Church calls the beatific vision, a vision of God's essence. Worship is an act of directing our wills to God as our end. The reason we ought not to murder or steal is because these acts prevent us from obtaining the beatific vision. They are not ordered to our perfection. So, the reason admiration for God is the first is because morality follows from the fact that we desire God's essence, primarily. As St. Thomas Aquinas says, I answer that the final and perfect happiness can consist in nothing else than the vision of the divine essence. To make this clear, 2 points must be observed. First, that man is not perfectly happy so long as something remains for him to desire and seek. Secondly, that the perfection of any power is determined by the nature of its object. Now, the object of the intellect is what a thing is, i.e., the essence of a thing, according to Diamina 3:6. Wherefore, the intellect attains perfection in so far as it knows the essence of a thing. If therefore an intellect knows the essence of some effect, whereby it is not possible to know the essence of the cause, i.e., to know of the cause what it is, that intellect cannot be said to reach that cause simply, although it may be able to gather from the effect the knowledge that the cause is. Consequently, when man knows an effect and knows that it has a cause, there naturally remains in the man the desire to know about the cause what it is, and this desire is one of wonder, and causes inquiry, as is stated at the beginning of the Metaphysics 1-2. For instance, if a man knowing the eclipse of the sun consider that it must be due to some cause, and know not what that cause is, he wonders about it, and from wondering proceeds to inquire. Nor does this inquiry cease until he arrives at a knowledge of the essence of the cause. If, therefore, the human intellect, knowing the essence of some created effect, knows no more of God than that he is, the perfection of that intellect does not yet reach simply the first cause, but there remains in it the natural desire to seek the cause, wherefore it is not yet perfectly happy. Consequently, for perfect happiness, the intellect needs to reach the very essence of the first cause, and thus it will have its perfection through union with God as with that object, in which alone man's happiness consists, as stated above.
Why would God not include a commandment for parents to respect their children to go alongside the commandment for children to respect their parents?
Obviously, because there is a power dynamic where the children are to be subject to their parents and not the other way around. The respect here is one of authority rather than a basic human respect.
Why would God allow Satan to exist? If he can eliminate the devil, then he doesn't want to, in which case he has malicious intent. If he can't eliminate the devil, then he's impotent. So which is it?
In your interview with Godless Engineer, you said that you do not use the argument from evil anymore because you think there are satisfactory answers to that problem.
I started to see the world for what it was, this place of sort of untold joy and happiness and wonder, but also this place of untold misery and suffering. And that started to get me to question things, because it was really playing on my mind. Why does God love me but not love the kids who are dying in Africa? As a kid, that's sort of the question. And I've now sort of realized that this isn't really something that I like to bring up in debates, because it's really easily defensible from a theological standpoint.
This is just one particular case of evil existing. So, do you now retract this question? As Augustine says, since God is the highest good, he would not allow any evil to exist in his works, unless his omnipotence and goodness were such to bring good even out of evil.
Why would God harden the heart of the Pharaoh of the book of Exodus, to then punish the Pharaoh with plagues for having a hardened heart?
It is important to note that God did not force the Pharaoh to harden his heart, but that Pharaoh did so at his own free will. To understand this, think of a common phrase we use today. It is common for someone to say that a person made him angry. This does not mean someone's will was supernaturally circumvented, forcing him to be angry. Neither does God force the Pharaoh to harden his heart, but the Pharaoh hardened his heart because of his pride, which was hurt by God's miracles and his request to free slaves, which he thought he owned. It is actually related back to the obstinance I was talking about when it comes to people hearing Jesus' parables. As St. Irenaeus said, and for the reason that the Lord spoke in parables and brought blindness upon Israel, that seeing they might not see, since he knew the unbelief in them. For the same reason did he harden Pharaoh's heart.
Why would God create a son to send to earth, destined to be mercilessly tortured and brutally crucified in order to forgive the sin of man, when he could have just forgiven the sin of man?
There's a long history of literature on this subject, but I will just cite one of the answers because you are perfectly capable of looking up the rest yourself. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." Jesus died to demonstrate his love and to set an example for us. I hope that these answers help you to understand, but more so, I hope that they give you a hint that there is much more you have to learn on this subject. You could ask hundreds of questions, and I may not have the answers to all of them, but I guarantee that someone in our rich intellectual history has answered your questions. You just have to be willing to seek. And today, that's just as easy as using Google. And so long as I feel that you are honestly seeking the truth, which includes doing some work on your end, I will be happy to answer more of your questions and to help you learn as I have time. Thanks for watching.